BS English students. Dr. KHALID MALIK is the founder of Applied Linguistics Groups and he has a PhD in Applied Linguistics to Seoul. He published more than 25 research papers. He taught a lot of foreign universities and presently admitted to a postdoctoral study in a Canadian university. Join Applied Linguistics Group at youtube.com/@1966 Pakistani or copying or downloading a QR code to join at https://www.facebook.com/groups/32913646441498083. The genetic source. Chomsky's hypothesis about the origin of language says that language is genetically imbibed in us by birth, that we innately know how to communicate. The view that genetics must contribute to our species' linguistic abilities has existed for many years, as illustrated by Chomsky 1959 and Lenneberg 1967, with Pinker and Bloom 1990 offering an influential evolutionary point of view. However, the discovery of concrete genetic influences on language had to await the development of modern DNA technologies. As has been the case for many aspects of human biology, the first insights into the genetic basis of language have come from the study of disorders, discussed in detail in the sections Rare Speech and Language Disorders and Common Disorders of Speech and Language. The classification of disorders as rare or common very likely reflects the underlying architecture. Rare diseases tend to be caused by single mutations of large effect within one particular gene, while common ones have more heterogeneous genetic architectures involving common variants with small effect, as well as rare variants in a number of different genes. While rare disorders can clearly be classified as abnormal, the genetic architecture of common disorders puts them on a spectrum with normal variation. Discussions of the genetic architectures of complex traits and common neurodevelopmental disorders, a useful context in which to understand language and speech, are provided in Beaton-Kerr 2011 and Durand and Rappold 2013. The genetic source of language. Human and chimpanzee babies are born alike, regarding the position of larynx and the brain. Both catch breath and drink at the same time. But the difference becomes visible, with the human larynx descending and the brain developing. This is also called innateness hypothesis. Calmness is the innateness in somebody given by nature. Sometimes it is a mutation in the gene. Mutation refers to an unusual change. Here it moves to the production of language from a physical source to a pre-programmed concept like in computers. This includes a language gene in the humans. Scientists conducted several experiments. The closest to the human being is orangutan. Several experiments conducted with chimpanzees and orangutan. During 1930s, 1940s, they were able to react to signals. Their vocal cords refused to develop, but they made a limited number of vocal calls. Chimpanzees and also dolphins understand signals and signs. Mutation happens and continues, depends on utility. What does it mean for languages to be genetically related? Genetic relations among humans and groups of humans have to do with the biological transmission of genes from generation to generation. Genetic relations among languages, however, are not biologically based, but are defined by cultural transmission from generation to generation. That is, languages are learned, not inherited via the genes. All languages change during the course of time, and the longer the time period, the greater the changes. When a language is culturally transmitted by speakers to their offspring over many generations, it can become so different that it is given a different name. Thus, for example, the Latin spoken in parts of the Iberian Peninsula changed over time and became Spanish. Proto-Germanic became Anglo-Saxon/Old English in England. Proto-Slavic became Old Church Slavonic, etc. A language whose speakers lose contact with one another can eventually evolve into numerous distinct languages. This is what happened with Proto-Indo-European, Latin, Proto-Germanic, and countless other languages spoken at various earlier periods in human history. Latin became Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, French, and a number of other languages spoken by groups currently without national status, for example Catalan, Galician, Provençal, Surselvan, and other lesser-known Romance languages. Proto-Germanic became English, Frisian, Dutch, German, Icelandic, Danish, Swedish, Norwegian, and a few other languages. We call such groups of languages related languages, because they are related to each other by virtue of paths of parent to offspring cultural transmission that trace back to a common source language. Cultural transmission that happens between groups of adults, in which one group takes some of the words of the other group's language, is a different kind of relation called language contact. The term related languages is not used for this kind of situation. Metaphorically, we can refer to the relation defined by a parent-to-child chain of language transmission as genetic relationship of languages. The source language can be called the ancestor language or the mother language, and the later languages deriving from it are called the descendant languages or the daughter languages. Daughter languages are descended from the mother language. If there is only cultural contact as described above, the relationship is not one of genetic descent. Genetically related languages can be closely related, or more distantly related, depending on how directly they trace back to a common source. Degree of relatedness can be represented by setting up a genetic classification of languages, shown in the form of a family tree in which daughter languages are plotted in relation to their mother languages, with direct connections representing closer relationship and indirect connections representing more distant relations. For example, English and Dutch are closely related languages and would be right next to each other on the Indo-European family tree, because they are both directly descended from a common ancestor language, Proto-Germanic, that itself came from Proto-Germanic. English and Latin are also related, because they both trace back to the ancient Proto-Indo-European language, but they are much more distantly related because more time has passed between the source and the daughter languages and there were several language splits that happened in the meantime. The intermediate splits define groupings of more closely related languages like the Germanic languages and the Romance languages. Genetic relations among languages are uncovered by observation of language data, words, and if available, grammatical endings, and systematic logical inference. A pattern of similarities across many languages in many basic words and endings, which is too widespread across the words to be due to chance or sound symbolism, and in which loanwords have been ruled out, based on non-basicness and other features typical of loanwords, must be due to genetic relationship. As the great Indo-Europeanist and Celticist Calvert Watkins wrote, "It has been rightly said that the comparatist has one fact and one hypothesis. The one fact is that certain languages present similarities among themselves so numerous and so precise that they cannot be attributed to chance and of such a kind that they cannot be explained as borrowings or as universal features. The one hypothesis is that these languages must then be the result of descent from a common original." Calvert Watkins, Indo-European and the Indo-Europeans. The family tree metaphor for language relationship is useful because it captures some similarities between language transmission and transmission of genes. Both involve transmission from generation to generation, but in one case it is cultural, the languages, the other biological, the genes. One problem with the family tree metaphor is that people often logically confuse language relationship with biological relationship. They apparently do this because sometimes biologically related groups of humans speak linguistically related languages, and perhaps because both types of relations share a similar branching tree structure involving degrees of closeness of relation. Also, they fail to think about how language is transmitted, and about the obvious counterexamples to the false general principle people with the same language ancestry must have the same biological ancestry and vice versa. The generalization is obviously false, since a language can always be adopted by a people whose ancestors spoke other languages. For example, most, if not all, American Indians in the US speak English. Most people in the US, in fact, speak English, with the exception of recent immigrants. Conversely, it is not true that people with the same biological ancestry necessarily speak the same language. Do you speak the language of your biological ancestors? Most Americans do not. The problem of confusion of biological versus linguistic ancestry and genetic relations can easily be avoided if we just recall that all culturally transmitted artifacts, technologies, and institutions are learned, not innate, including human languages, and that the family tree metaphor of language relationships is just that, a metaphor. Genetic methods have revolutionized research into many aspects of languages, including the tracing of their origins. Gene variants underlie individual language skills. Genetic predisposition might favor the evolution of structural features of languages. Humans have a unique natural ability to develop highly complex linguistic systems, an ability that lies in our genes but is also shaped by our different environments. We can learn languages from others and use them to share our thoughts, feelings and desires. Languages are the foundation of society, culture and science. So it is perhaps not surprising that all aspects of language, including structure, global distribution, acquisition, processing in the brain, role in thought and actions, and links with culture and education, can be considered to be important subjects of research. What is so special about our genetic makeup that allows us to use language? How does this ability relate to other higher cognitive functions, like human memory and mathematical or musical ability? Until recently, it has been hard to even pose these questions. The past few years, however, have seen the rapid development of methods to analyze genes quickly and relatively cheaply. At last we can begin to study the genetic basis of human cognition and, hence, language. 3 examples of ongoing research are described here. Language processing. The human genome does not create languages, however, it does direct the organization of the human brain and some peripheral organs that are prerequisites for the language system, and is probably responsible for the significant differences in language skills between individuals. At the extremes are people with extraordinary gifts for learning many languages and undertaking simultaneous interpretation, and people with severe congenital speech disorders. Exciting early results have identified a gene underlying one form of speech disorder known as verbal dyspraxia 2. This serious impairment is characterized by problems in articulation, along with other linguistic symptoms. Genetic studies of an English family with verbal dyspraxia have shown that the condition results from a mutation in the gene, known as FOXP2 located on chromosome, which affects the language areas of the brain via several intermediate steps. Although this speech deficit is rare, it now seems that the same genetic mechanism could play a role in other, much more common congenital speech pathologies. However, FOXP2 is not a language gene, that is a term coined by the media. The same mutation also affects the liver, for example, and the non-mutated gene is found in many other animals, such as the mouse, which do not speak. Rather, it is one of many genetic components important in the development of language ability. Nevertheless, its discovery was the first small breakthrough in understanding the genetic basis of human language. Language and populations. Anthropologists believe that modern humans originated in Africa. Is there a link between the spread of languages and the genetic differences between the peoples who speak them? Recent research using modern scientific methods has thrown up some surprises. One of the most interesting shows how genetic and linguistic classifications of populations can diverge. Most European languages belong to the Indo-European group. 2 notable exceptions are Basque, which is relatively isolated, and the Finno-Ugric languages, in particular Finnish. Modern Finns have been found to be genetically close to Indo-Europeans, but genetically different from their Sami neighbors whose language is also Finno-Ugric. One study is examining the effect of contact between prehistoric populations with different socio-cultural backgrounds in different locations, particularly Africa and Siberia, on language and genetics. The types of contact that occurred are unknown, so it is hard to assess their consequences using only linguistic methods. Molecular genetic analyses can help spot a bottleneck, or founder effect, that might indicate a mixing of different populations, or reveal discrepancies between genetic and language relationships indicative of recent language drift. Another study is addressing the development and spread of languages over larger geographical areas. The traditional methods of comparative historical linguistics, based primarily on similarities in vocabulary, can make sense of language evolution over only the past few thousand years at most. The new project adapts the widely used methods of evolutionary genetics, namely, the construction of phylogenetic trees, with the phonological, morphological and syntactic features of language as raw data, primarily to study the sophisticated languages and peoples of Melanesia, an area covering most of the islands north and northeast of Australia. The methods were developed and tested on a small well-researched subgroup of Austronesian languages and are now being applied to the much more complex relationships between the Part 1 languages spoken in the same area. The results suggest that these languages derive from a common phylum that is much older than the Australian languages, which arrived in the area only 3,000 years ago. Structural differences. Even though languages are not inborn, a specific genetic predisposition within a group of genetically similar individuals might influence the evolution of particular structural features of a language. Tonal languages, for example, like Chinese, are different from non-tonal languages, like German. Languages are not inborn. There are approximately 7,000 languages in the world today, and learning any one of them is a lengthy process that takes around a decade. There is no reason why a Chinese child growing up in Germany should learn to speak German any worse than a German child or a child of any other nationality. A specific genetic predisposition, however, might influence the evolution of particular structural features of a language within a group of genetically similar individuals, for example whether the language is tonal or non-tonal. Chinese is perhaps the most well-known of the tonal languages, in which a single syllable can convey different meanings according to whether it is spoken in a consistent tone or a rising, falling or falling tone. The distribution of tonal and non-tonal languages corresponds closely with the distribution of two alleles, or forms, of the abnormal spindle-like microcephaly-associated, ASPM, and microcephalin genes. Of course, alleles by themselves do not directly lead to the evolution and use of tonal languages. Children with different forms of the genes will still be able to learn tonal languages. A particular genetic predisposition in a population, however, might favor the emergence of languages with particular structural characteristics. It is now possible to study whether there might also be a genetic predisposition to other structural properties, like poverty or richness of inflection. Science historians are familiar with the power of new technologies to revolutionize science. We are standing before an advance that will feel particularly close to home. Over the next decade or so, we can expect new genomics technologies to further our understanding of one quintessential aspect of being human language. Conclusion. The languages of the world, which form part of and are the main bearers of cultures, are highly diverse. The capacity to develop, learn and use them, however, belongs to our shared genetic heritage. These aspects of language are researched intensively at the Max Planck Institutes for Psycholinguistics, Evolutionary Anthropology, and Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences. Applied Linguistics Group uploaded this video for BS English students. Dr. KHALID MALIK is the founder of Applied Linguistics Groups and he has a PhD in Applied Linguistics TESOL. He published more than 25 research papers. He taught a lot of foreign universities and presently admitted to a postdoctoral study in a Canadian university. Join Applied Linguistics group at youtube.com/@1966 Pakistani or copying or downloading a QR code to join at https://www.facebook.com/groups/32913646464149083